Casey and John Fetterman, who will continue to deliver for the people of Pennsylvania, I believe. John, if you can hear this at all, we're with you, pal. We're with you. Everybody asks why I ever moved from Scranton. I moved from Scranton because we live 5 blocks from the Caseys. You think I'm kidding? And I knew as long as his dad was around, I'd never be able to be a senator or governor of Pennsylvania. And then along comes Bobby. Anyway, great family and great friends. Folks, here's why I'm here today. For too long, working people have been breaking their necks, but the economy's left them behind. And working people like you, while those at the top get away with everything and get everything. One of the reasons why I ran for president, and I mean this sincerely, you may remember when I announced this, there were 3 reasons I was running. 1, to restore the soul of America, restore some decency and honor to the system. And 2, to rebuild the backbone of the country, the middle class. When the middle class does well, the poor have a way up and the wealthy still do very well. And the 3rd one is to unite the country. Didn't think we could do that. But as we've seen all the talk about we never get any cooperation from the other team, the last 2 years, we passed some pretty big things with bipartisan support. You know, I ran to grow the economy from the middle out and the bottom up and not the top down. And I know when I grew up, my dad's kitchen table, not a whole lot trickled down economics into my kitchen table for my dad. That's why I wanted to come here today to lay out the next part of my economic plan. My budget I'm sending to Congress today. And if I could hold for just a second, I want to be clear, and I'll be clear to the press as well. The fact is that the Speaker of the House he's a very conservative guy, and he has even more conservative group with him. But he and I met early on, and he said, what are we going to do about the budget? And I said, let's make a deal. Let's meet. I said, I'm going to introduce my budget on the 9th of March. You introduce yours, and we'll sit down and we'll go line by line, and we'll go through it. We'll see what we can agree on and what we disagree on, and then fight it out in the Congress. So I want to make it clear, I'm ready to meet with the Speaker anytime, tomorrow, if he has his budget. Lay it down, tell me what you want to do, I'll show you what I want to do, see what we can agree on, what we don't agree on, let's see what we vote on. Now, I'm not going to lay out the entire budget. That would take the rest of the day. But no, it's a detailed budget. But I want to give you the contours of what we're for and how it's in stark contrast for what appears to be what the other team is for. My dad had an expression. Someone would come up to my dad and say, let me tell you what I value, Joe. And my dad would say, no, show me your budget, I'll tell you what you value. No, I'm serious. My expression my dad would use, show me your budget, I will tell you what you value. Well, folks, let me tell you what I value with the budget I'm releasing today. I value everyone having an even shot, not just labor, but small business owners, farmers, and so many other people who hold the country together who have been basically invisible for a long time. So at the end of the month, after working like the devil, they just have a little bit more breathing room, as my dad would say. After you pay all your bills, you're sitting at that kitchen table writing out the last bill, do you have just a little bit of breathing room left? So my budget reflects what we can do to lift the burden on hardworking Americans. And there's more than one way to do that. And that's what bring us down to everyday cost. How much do things cost? It's not just whether inflation. We brought down inflation 7 months in a row. We're going to whip it. But in the meantime, there's other ways to take what is inflation in your budget. I just met, I won't embarrass them by pointing out, I don't have permission, but I just met a woman who has health care costs that are $600,000 a year, $7,000 a month. Well, guess what? How can you possibly deal with that? Well, we just dealt with it, by the way. We just dealt with it. For example, prescription drugs. We pay more for prescription drugs in America than any other advanced nation on earth. Let me say that again. In the United States of America, for whatever prescription drug you're buying, you're paying more than any other nation on earth as an advanced nation. We're finally beginning to change that. I've been fighting that for over 30 years. Because of a law that I worked on and for decades and that I just signed last year, we took Big Pharma on. And we won. For the first time, we won. The other team didn't think that's a good idea. None of them voted for it. They think big pharma should be able to make extraordinary profits, exorbitant profits at the expense of the American people. And that's not hyperbole, that's a fact. Medicare finally has the power now to negotiate for lower drug prices. And by the way, they've been able to do that at the VA. At the VA, they're able to say, we're only going to pay X amount of dollars for this particular drug that, in fact, the veterans need. The only place that was exempt was Medicare. They couldn't do it for Medicare, but now they can. And it's going to lower prices for seniors. But here's the deal. Not only, for example, the woman I just mentioned, by the beginning of 2025, she'll not have to pay more than $2,000 a year total amount for drugs. $2,000. Folks, it's not just going to save people's lives and save people money so they don't have to go bankrupt to try to stay alive. It's going to save the government. It's going to reduce the deficit this year, $160 billion. These guys keep saying, how are you going to cut the deficit? Well, guess what? If your tax dollars don't have to go up paying all that exorbitant price for Medicare to drug companies, and it's rational, it's going to save $160 billion in tax dollars. Millions of Americans have diabetes. They need insulin literally to stay alive. How many people know somebody who needs insulin for their diabetes? Raise your hand. Well, they're paying somewhere between $400 and $700 a month now, or were until last month. Well, guess what? That insulin was invented 100 years ago. I mean, literally 100 years ago, okay? You know how much it cost to make that insulin? $10. You know how much it costs to make it and package it? $13.50. And charging the kind of money they charge? Well, guess what? Guess what? Now we've lowered the cost of the insulin to maximum $35 a month. I was at a town meeting in Northern Virginia last year, and a woman stood up, and she was a little embarrassed to speak. She said, I have 2 daughters with diabetes, and I can't afford the insulin. And she talked like that. She said, and we have to split it sometimes. Can you imagine looking at your son or daughter and knowing you don't have the money to pay for the insulin to keep them alive and healthy? Not a joke. Talk about being deprived of your dignity. Well, not anymore. Seniors on Medicare don't have to pay more than $35 a month. And guess what? When not only I thought we should cut it for everybody to $35 a month. But my friends and other team knocked it out. I didn't have the votes. I lost by a couple votes. Well, guess what? Capping the cost for everybody at $35 a month, especially those 200,000 children with type 1 diabetes. Well, here's what happened. Eli Lilly, one of the world's biggest drug companies, just announced it's capping the cost of insulin at $35 a month. Now, how are the rest of these folks going to charge more than that when you can go to Eli Lilly and buy it for $35 a month? So, folks, it's going to save a lot of lives, but also it's going to give parents back the dignity they've been deprived because they can't take care of their kid for something that's so basic and so important. But again, the MAGA Republicans want to take away the law. One of the things they've announced, they want to do away with the Inflation Reduction Act. Okay, well, we have a difference in budget ideas, man. More than budget ideas, but anyway. And by the way, how many people, maybe even some of you know people who stared at the ceiling last night wondering, God forbid, If I get pancreatic cancer, my wife gets breast cancer, something happens, what's going to happen? How are we going to pay the bills? I can tell a story, and my dad would probably be mad at my telling him were he alive. We lived in a 3-bedroom split-level home. Nice, I mean, it was a nice home. We were a middle-class family with 4 kids and a grandpa. And the bed my headboard was against in the room with myself and my 2 brothers was against the wall my dad's was. My dad was really restless. You could hear it one night. He could hear the bed. And I asked my mom the next morning, what's wrong with Dad? She said, his company said no more health insurance. They weren't going to pay for it. Well, guess what? A lot of people are lying in bed at night wondering what they're going to do. They're going to have to sell the house? What do they have to do if one of them gets really sick? Well, thanks to the American Rescue Plan, which not one single Republican voted for, that I signed in the law as soon as I got to office, millions of Americans, or millions more have enrolled in the Affordable Care Act, saving an additional $800 a year for better coverage at better prices. My budget's going to make those savings permanent. We've passed them up till now, but they'll expire if I don't get them done again. My MAGA Republicans all voted to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. They voted to get rid of it over 50 times since Barack passed it. Over 50 times. Well, it is. I think it is shameful. Folks, no one can deny we have a climate crisis. So we've seen more land, for example. I've been in more helicopter rides these last 2 years, particularly from Arizona all the way up to Idaho, all the way in the West Coast. More forests have burned to the ground than the entire state of Maryland, the entire size of the state of Maryland. Look what's happening. The Colorado River has become a creek. You have all these environmental problems that are so profound, they're hard to deny. And people are seeing them now, along with extreme superstorms and droughts. That's why I took the most aggressive action ever in all of history in any country to take on the climate crisis by lowering your home energy bills, which MAGA Republicans voted against. We've now gotten to the point where it's cheaper to generate electricity from wind and solar than it is from coal and or fossil fuels. And I'm from Scranton. Okay, I'm not against coal per se. A lot of people made a living on that way. But we're providing incentives for folks to make the transition. So here's what we're doing. We're providing you with a tax credit and rebates if you're buying new energy-efficient appliances. Heat pumps, the new heat pumps, they can heat the whole damn house. No, I'm serious, not a joke. Well, if you need a heater and you need to buy one of those heat pumps, you get a tax credit for doing it. And water heaters, tax credit to weatherize your homes with better windows and doors. I gathered together leaders from American Auto Workers in the South Lawn of the White House, all American manufacturers. And it was 2 years, a year and a half, well, 2 summers ago. And guess what? They all agreed within the next month. They came to me and said, we're going to go all electric. We're going to go all electric. And that's going to save billions of gallons of gasoline burning into the air. It's not only going to save the environment, it's going to help create really good paying jobs. We're providing tax credits for folks who buy electric vehicles to encourage them to do it. We're still going to need combustion engines. We're going to still need oil for the next 10 to 15 years, because all of a sudden they're not all going to go away. But all this is going to lower energy costs for families on an average of $1,000 a year and create good-paying union jobs. Jimmy, I told you I was going to be the most pro-union president in history. I've kept my promise. I've kept my promise. And by the way, when we're talking about the creating jobs, my buddies at the IBEW were the strongest support I had this year. Well, guess what? They're going to install 500,000 charging stations all across America. And by the way, The things I'm proposing not only lift the burden off of families in America, it's also going to generate economic growth. And that's not all. To support working parents, my budget expands access to affordable child care for millions of families. And it's going to invest in paid family and medical leave, which all of you fought like hell for, so that the U.S. is no longer the only major economy in the world that doesn't have paid leave. Folks, my budget also invests in elder care and home care. How many of you are like I went through with my mom and my dad as they got older? They wanted to stay in their own home. It was cheaper to stay in their own home than to have to sell everything and have everything gone to go into a home. Well, fortunately, I lived close enough and they could move in with me. But my point is, it's cheaper if we in fact provide for the ability for them to stay in their homes. It's not only the right thing to do, but it's cheaper on the taxpayer. All the things are going to help folks go to work, generate economic growth in our nation, and still take care of their families. The point is that every time I talk about things, people talk about it like this is an overwhelming burden on the taxpayer. It's going to save money for the taxpayers. No, it really does. Save money for the taxpayers and generate growth. That's how the economy grows. That's why I was able to create 12 million new jobs in 2 years. More than any president in American history has created in 4 years. We've done in 2 years what no president's done in 4 years because of you. But the point is, it's good for everybody. We're not hurting anyone. My budget also restores the child tax credit. You know, when that was in place during the pandemic, guess what? Child poverty was cut in half to the lowest level in all American history. And guess what? Because moms are able to go to work. Moms are able to go out there and make a living. Folks, we can reduce child poverty and increase child opportunity. Again, it's going to help millions of parents go to work, knowing their children are being taken care of. And yet, only a few of my Republican friends support it. My wife, Jill, who's a Philly girl, if I didn't root like hell for every Philadelphia team, I'd be sleeping alone. Oh, you think I'm kidding? Jimmy knows whoa. Anyway, she's in class today teaching. She has an expression she uses for real. He said, any country that out-educates us will outcompete us. Let me say it again. Any country that out-educates us will outcompete us. For decades, we were the only country in the world. We led the world economically. We were the only economy in the world that was moving that fast because we had the best educated public in the world. We started before any other country. Had higher education, was more sophisticated, and a lot of private institutions. But everybody in America at the turn of the 20th century said that we could go to school for free for 12 years. It was a game changer. It was a game changer. But the rest of the world has caught up. We all know 12 years is not enough to succeed in the second quarter of the 21st century. Seriously, 12 years is not enough. If we want America to have the best educated workforce, we need to invest in preschool. I'm not talking about daycare. I'm talking about school. All the studies have recently shown this is real. Think about it now. That, you've heard all these stories that if you come from a broken home or where mom or dad has a drug addiction or there's a real problem or, books in the house, etc., by the time a kid gets to first grade, they will have heard 1 million fewer words spoken. Not different words, just spoken. They're not included. Well, guess what? Studies that children go to preschool who go 3, 4, 5, 6 years, 3, 4, 5 years old, go to school, not daycare, they increase by nearly 50% the likelihood that they'll finish high school and go on to earn a 2 or 4 year degree no matter what their background is. Because guess what? Their brain's still developing. They're still developing. They're exposed to the same thing other kids are exposed to. They grow. We also know that many families struggle to afford college for their children. That's why we had these things called, and some of you may have used them, Pell Grants, For families earning less than $60,000 a year, they can get a Pell Grant to go to college, help them pay for college. Well, the last 2 years, we've increased Pell Grants by $900, and my budget increases by another $820. It used to be if you went to the University of Pennsylvania, Penn State, or the University of Delaware where I went, state schools, the state paid a significant portion of the tuition. They're not anymore. They're not paying anymore. They're paying some, but not much, because they've cut paying for it. Well, guess what? Try paying for college, even at a state institution where you can commute. It's expensive as hell, especially if you're a couple kids in a family making less than 60 grand a year. So it matters a lot. It matters a lot. The more we educate people, the better chance they have. Doesn't mean everybody that's educated is going to succeed, but it's a significantly better opportunity. And the world's getting a hell of a lot more complicated. So I've increased my budget. We increase it now, as I said, we're paying another $820 to help people from families with low incomes. Let's connect students' careers and opportunities starting in high school. We should provide for 2 years of community college. By the way, in school, when you're a sophomore, junior in high school, you should be able to take credits that allow you to qualify for college credit at a state university or at a community college. People are beginning to do that around the country. Some of the best training in America occurs there. Let's offer every American a path to a good career, whether they go to college or not, like the path you started here. The first apprenticeship program in the nation in which students can graduate as a full-time journeyman with an associate's degree here. In the past 2 years, we've created, as I said, 12 million jobs, more than 2 years than any president's done in 4 years. I don't have to tell the union workers here that includes 800,000 manufacturing jobs in 2 years. 2 years. We've also seen more people apply to start small businesses than ever before. Not just unions, it's small businesses. People are now, more people. What's someone making an application to start a small business? It's about hope. It's about hope. In the last several decades, corporate America things began to change. I come from the corporate state of the world, Delaware. Literally, more corporations are incorporated in the state of Delaware than every other state in the United States combined. It used to be, when I was in high school, when I first got started, those corporations had some greater social responsibility. They paid higher taxes. They actually saw to it that they trained their employees. They don't train them anymore. When I was vice president, I met with the Secretary of Commerce, and we met with 300, and don't hold me to the exact number, 347, 46 CEOs. And so what do you need most? You know what the overwhelming request was? A better educated public. Well, guess what? Back then, they used to educate their workers. The DuPont company, they buy a new industry, they would educate them how to do it. They don't do it anymore. And one of the other things started happening 3-4 decades ago. American companies started to ship jobs overseas. Why? Cheaper labor. They'd go where they could find the cheapest labor in Asia or Africa, wherever it was. And they'd bring home product made. Well, guess what? We're going to export product and bring jobs home. That's what this is about. I'm not joking.
We've been watching President Biden announce his budget proposal for the next fiscal year. The president says he plans to continue his effort to deliver for the middle class.
The president discussed his plans to cut the deficit by $3 trillion by adding a billionaire's tax. He wants to cap the cost of insulin and lower other costs, including health care for the American people.
The president outlined his differences with Republicans, but says he plans to meet with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy over the next few weeks in order to come up with a compromise.
Joining us now for more on this is CBS News Chief White House Correspondent Nancy Cordes. Nancy, what are some of the most notable actions the president is pushing for in his budget proposal?
Well, let's go through some of the big new spending items first, Nikki, and then we'll talk about some of the new taxes. So the president is proposing spending hundreds of billions of dollars, new dollars, on things like pre-K, free community college, paid family leave, affordable child care. But the White House is insisting that all of this new spending will be more than offset by all the new taxes that they're proposing, including raising the corporate tax rate from 21 to 28% and letting some of the Trump-era tax cuts for wealthy individuals, those making more than $400,000 a year, expire, plus a new hike in the Medicare tax rate for people making over $400,000 a year. And then you mentioned that big 25% billionaires tax. There are more, but those are some of the highlights. All in all, the White House says that this would cut the deficit by about $3 trillion over the next 10 years. And you sort of saw the president at the start of that speech lay down a gauntlet and say, OK, Speaker McCarthy, I'm showing you mine, you show me yours. What do you want to cut? How do you want to lower the deficit? Because Republicans have said that that's something that's very important to them, but they haven't said yet how they plan to do it.
So now the fun starts. I guess the president said he's ready to meet with House Speaker McCarthy. I believe the quote was anytime, even as soon as tomorrow. So, Nancy, let me just ask you, is this posturing, the typical Biden affability of let's talk, or is this actually a signal that perhaps there might be less divisiveness while negotiating than initially believed?
Certainly plenty of posturing, but the White House is well aware that Republicans, led by Speaker McCarthy, have said that they are not going to vote to raise the debt ceiling, which is something that they need to do in order to enable the country to keep borrowing to pay its bills sometime this summer. They say they're not going to vote to do that unless there are major spending cuts. And so this is the president saying, OK, here's what I would cut. He actually isn't proposing any cuts to domestic or military spending, really. He's proposing raising more money via taxes. The White House believes that what he's proposing is broadly popular. So they're saying, OK, well, if you want to cut domestic programs, show us what you want to cut. Do you want to cut programs for the poor? Do you want to cut Medicare or Social Security? How do you want to do it? And Speaker McCarthy has said, just like the president, that he wants to sit down and continue to talk. But this is the president basically saying, well, show me your numbers first, and then we'll talk.
Nancy, to what extent is today's speech and the president's decision to make it in Philadelphia significant to his potential 2024 run?
Very significant. I mean, this is a battleground state, Pennsylvania, so it's one that the president seems to return to time and time again for big announcements like this one. The White House quick to point out that Pennsylvania is something of a second home for him. He grew up in Scranton, so he has personal ties to the state, but he will be beating a path to Pennsylvania many, many times over the next year and a half because it is such an important battleground. And this budget, in many years, budgets kind of come and go because they aren't binding. Any president can propose anything, but it's Congress at the end of the day that makes the laws that govern federal spending. But it is getting more attention this time around, both because of that Republican threat that they may not vote to raise the debt ceiling, and because we are getting close to a potential announcement of a re-election bid by this president. And so this, in a way, sort of serves as a blueprint of his policy priorities. Most of these things can't pass now that Republicans control the House. In fact, they couldn't pass even the last couple of years when Democrats controlled the House. But nevertheless, the president is saying, this is what I want to do now, and this is what I'd like to do in a second term as well.
CBS News Chief White House Correspondent Nancy Cordes, thanks so much for spending some time with us.
You're welcome.
Next on CBS News, we look at the latest unemployment report and how it could influence the next interest rate hike.
An original documentary from CBS reports. Controversial Congressman George Santos.
Why won't you answer our questions?
How did he manage to get elected?
Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless the USA.
George Santos' campaign